Feel like a right doing this, but here we go.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all doing great. Thank you all so much for being here. I love that comment from Kelsey already. Anyone else dance along to the song every Tuesday morning? It does feel a little bit like that. It's wicked to see Gareth here from Singapore as well. And from Singapore all the way to Luton with Chris Carr, which I absolutely love. We're getting exotic. So good morning, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. And before we get going, let me just say how grateful I am for you being here today, but also that you are going to be the other half of how this session goes. This session works in two ways. The first is the content. The second is the chat feature. If you are there today chatting, sharing, discussing, looking to help each other, looking to connect, today's session will be so much better than it could possibly ever be. I will say 1 year into doing these webinars that was probably the thing I underestimated the most, was the importance of this chat feature. So please do take the time to set it on fire today, and just look to support each other and sort of enjoy today's session together. The best way that you're going to be able to do that is by heading to your settings on the chat feature, and you'll see a little blue sort of toggle tab. You'll be able to switch that from just two panelists, and you'll be able to switch it to all panelists and attendees, or panelists and attendees, and that will enable everyone to see your messages, and you'll be able to have the chat that this talk today deserves. With all that said, today's session, I'm so happy to welcome Ryan Wallman and Giles Edwards, to both of whom are sterling chaps, and who have worked on the project of Delusions of Grandeur to bring it to life. The most excellent book, of which we were just speaking about Rory Sutherland before we went live, and the book can count Rory amongst the fans of the book, among many other people. It's really brilliant, and if you haven't already read it, I would recommend checking it out. It's usually at this time that I take the time to say something really nice about the speakers, to sort of praise their egos and really get them excited for today's session. But actually, when I was posting on LinkedIn yesterday, someone said something that was far better than anything that I could say, and it was from Tom Elmer. So hi, Tom. And Tom said, to paraphrase his comment, he said that I'm going to watch this live and I look forward to that, which might not be a big deal to you, but for me, it's going to be 3:30 a.m. in Westchester, Pennsylvania. So why do that when it's taped? Well, Delusions of Grandeur is as savage as it is brilliant. There's no other marketing book like it. I used the In Loving Memory of Advertising chapter in class this week, where Tom teaches. And for me, that kind of sums it up. If someone's willing to wake up at 4:30 in the morning to hear a marketing talk, it's got to speak to someone who's done something and shared something worth sharing. And that's all I need to say really on that point. So well done, chaps. I think that's really quite something special. Today's session will run as a presentation, and then we'll have time for Q&A too. Do drop any questions that you have in the Q&A feature. So you'll find that by wiggling your mouse, and you'll be able to find the Q&A feature down the bottom. The thing that I would add on that particular point is that the questions that get asked first tend to be the ones that sort of gravitate towards the top when it comes to using the thumbs up feature to get those questions that you want answered towards the top. So I'll get your questions in nice and early. My last point before handing over to Ryan and Giles is to say a big thank you to the sponsors. And it feels quite poignant a year in, after cancelling all our events, that we're able to say that every one of our sponsors has stood by our side for the duration of this time and the time before. And during that time, because of that, we've been able to grow our community and look to support each other and provide this safe space and sort of have a view on the world and have one that people have gravitated to over the course of time. So without them, all of this wouldn't have been possible. Today, I want to focus on Gravity Global very quickly. They are an agency that used to be known as Further, so you might know them as Further. They've since been acquired by Gravity Global. And our relationship was really solidified after they came to the Cambridge Marketing Meetup, and then I met their co-founder by chance on my stag do. 4 years later, they're still involved and still sponsoring, and an unbelievable agency that you really should take the time to check out and say thank you to. It's also important to mention our other sponsors today. So Impression, Content Cal, Pitch, Fiverr, Redgate, Cambridge Marketing College, Brand Recruitment, Third Light, and Human. My one ask is that you take the time to thank them. Without them, we wouldn't be able to do these sessions, and you'll find the opportunity to thank them in the follow-up email that goes out after this. So that's me done. Ryan and Giles, it's over to you, chaps.
Cheers, Joe. Thanks, Tom. Tom's my dad. Could really let you know that. Let me just check this is working. Right, do we have slides?
You're all good. You got slides.
Nice one. So yeah, thanks again, Joe, for hosting us. So this happened, here we go. So this happened a few weeks ago. And as the BBC's QI explains, it's not known for sure if paradoxical undressing, which is taking your clothes off in the final stages of hypothermia, is a mental symptom and a sign of delusion, or a physical symptom and people really do feel hot despite actually being cold. But one thing that is known is it ultimately accelerates death, which is a nice cheery way to start this talk, isn't it? It's too easy, and not to mention lazy and dangerous, to say sweeping statements like marketing has never been so bad, etc. What we can do is look at the evidence, and what we can say is Ryan and I believe we're accelerating this demise in how we talk and how we behave. So our hope then today is to demonstrate how best to frame the unavoidable concept of risk versus reward, to better communicate the value of creativity, and to explain why being brave can be a fool's errand. So from the outside looking in, there is a significant lack of trust in marketing from the general public. If you look at the absolute state of that, these findings are from last November, so they're only 4 or 5 months old. And if you can't see that clearly, just keep looking down and down the list, and you'll eventually see us. Just below Boris and his assortment of Muppets, we're below. Here we are, same data, different lens, zooming in on the relegation scrap at the bottom. We're actually down from 17% in 2019. There is a significant lack of admiration for the creative fields. There is a significant drop in school and college age young talent looking to join our industry. That data isn't in this deck, but there are parallels with this chart, and ultimately that's depressing enough for this time of day. Client-side marketers are increasingly seen as the colouring in department. Agency side are being devalued again and again in a race to the bottom that has resulted in a huge exodus of talent. Of course, there are numerous reasons, including the billable hour, the media supply chains, the accountants making creative decisions based on spreadsheets that simply cannot present the very thing they're attempting to rationalize, creativity. It's a language that few speak, and those that do are often beholden to those that do not. And it's really up to us to guide ourselves out of this position. I've long thought that semantics, literally the meaning of words, is a root of many problems and conflicts, both in our world, in the global sense of it, across all walks of life, and in our world of marketing and communications. And there's a few threads tying this talk together, hopefully. One is just that, language. So let's not be too hard on ourselves. Richard Lederer is a brilliant linguist, and he describes English as a crazy language, the most loopy and wiggy of all tongues. Wiggy means emotionally uncontrolled, by the way. I had to look it up. In case you missed it, have a quick read of this. It's an example from just the other day that caused a lot of provocation, an unhealthy amount of offense, and some Twitter retaliation. But if you strip away the layer of total guff, John is really saying, he being the chief creative officer, that Oatly disassembled an ineffective department and created an effective department. That's it. He happened to call one marketing and one creative. Tomato, tomato. It doesn't matter if he calls it Bob in some respects, except that it does matter if it causes problems. What we mean when we say brand or strategy or influencer may likely differ. He's a right wanker, said in Australian accents, is a sign of affection, Ryan assures me. A common cultural and contextual problem that exists the world over. So the meaning of words is important, specifically what I think you mean being equal to what you think you mean. As soon as those definitions drift apart, you're in Oatly territory. But also how we say it. There's tone, there's context, and there's method to the delivery, best demonstrated by my wife, Sophie, whose simple request to remove stickers from some new lights they'd installed were being repeatedly ignored by one of our builders, Barry. So she delivered the message in Barry's language in a way Barry would understand and a manner that would have impact. But Barry came as a duo known as Kenny and Barry. So she targeted Kenny too. These are some of our hurdles. And what we need is a different, more effective way of communicating our worth in the boardrooms up and down the country. What we're saying and what we're meaning isn't necessarily the problem. The problem is what is being heard. Talk of being brave, talk of risk, it's paradoxical. The risk is sameness. It's looking and sounding like everyone else in your industry. It's doing the same thing everyone else is. Yet there's a perception and understandable feeling of safety via majority and mass. It's cozy. Whereas everything else being relative and put simply, the more you stand out, the more distinctive you are, the more salience you enjoy, the more successful you will be. If everyone else is choosing the same 6 numbers in this week's lotto, the last thing you should be doing is buying the same numbers. You're just diluting potential gains.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Good.
I got you, mate.
Okay, good. Okay, thanks, Giles. So to segue, I guess, from what Giles has just been talking about, I'm gonna start with a classic joke here. So there's a senior citizen driving on the highway. His wife calls him on his hands-free phone, of course, hands-free, and in a worried voice says, "Joe, be careful. I just heard on the radio that there's a madman driving the wrong way on the M25. Joe says, "Yes, I know, but there isn't just one, there are hundreds." So marketing is a little bit like this. And, you know, if we consider ourselves to be Joe, essentially the paradox is that we are actually going the right way, by going in the opposite direction from everyone else. And the difference from this joke is that, obviously Joe is heading into danger, whereas we as marketers are committing commercial suicide if we go the same way as everyone else. So what we really need to do is position the fear and risk as something that's negative, and that's something that we haven't been doing. What we really need to do is the opposite of that. We need to position these decisions that we're expecting of our clients, or in the case of those of you who work on the client side, maybe our managers. We need to position these decisions as being ones of more certainty and less risk. So essentially, as Joe, if we are Joe, then if we stand out and we are more distinct, then we're already at a brand advantage. And so if you look at this, you look at this image, there are more than 25 sheep in this image. But essentially what our minds do is they only register two, which is a black sheep and a white sheep. And the brain is a pattern-making machine. It essentially tries to organise things as simply as possible in order to process them and to make life cognitively easy for ourselves. So there was a psychologist called Hedwig von Restorff who described this phenomenon. She studied and practiced psychology according to the Gestalt traditions. And what she found is probably most simply visually represented in this way, and Giles and I have shamelessly stolen this from Dave Trott. But what it shows you is, the obvious element that stands out to you on this graphic is the one that's different, which is the X. And essentially, this is a simplified version of this example. So you can see here, it says red, blue, yellow, green, pink, brown, elephant, orange, purple, grey. And so this is what has now become known as the von Restorff effect, which is also known as the isolation or the Zarnes effect. And what it has shown is that the more that something stands out from the crowd, the more likely it is to be noticed. And this is actually pretty obvious. When you see examples like this, it's really obvious. And it's something that we kind of implicitly understand as humans when we see it. So why is it that, we don't talk about these things when we're presenting, for example, those of us on the agency side, when we're presenting creative work, why don't we say this and kind of elicit nods from whoever is likely to hear it, rather than talking about, being brave, trying to convince clients or CMOs or whoever to be brave? It really doesn't make a lot of sense. So this is probably my favourite example of the von Restorff effect. This is a poster for a death metal festival from a few years ago. And as you can see, there's one band that stands out pretty clearly amongst all the death and metal, which is the amazingly titled Party Cannon. And what you'd have to say about this is, you have to question, why is it that a Scottish death metal band seems to understand the principles of psychology better than quite a few marketing departments and kind of brand custodians? It's an interesting question. But, I guess one of the challenges that we face if we were to present something like this, particularly in such a homogeneous industry, is that you're always going to get the pushback of, well, I don't like it. And I think the important thing to note here is that subjectivity is really not welcome. And I think as an industry, we should be beyond that kind of thing. Subjectivity is really in the realm of things like art galleries or musicians or, cinema. That's what artists should be doing. They practice what we might call pure creativity, whereas we in the marketing field are practicing applied creativity. There are genuine business outcomes that we need to be aware of. And so, basically, if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And that's kind of the extent of it. If a CFO, if you tried to tell a CFO that you didn't like their financial forecast, they wouldn't accept that. And more importantly, they really wouldn't care, because what matters is whether they're right or not. And similarly in marketing, what is right in marketing is marketing that works. And that's what I think we need to be aware of. It's certainly the consumer's right or prerogative to like a logo or a brand or an ad or whatever it is, but it's our job to be effective. And the problem is that the way that we talk about creative work and the way that we talk about these things can steer us towards subjective discussions, and that's what we really need to avoid. So I think an interesting analogy here is to look at an image like this. Look at this parachute and tell me, do you like this parachute? And you would probably quite rightly push back on that and say, well, that's a nonsensical question, because nobody really likes parachutes. Nobody considers the aesthetic appeal of a parachute. What matters is whether the fucking thing works, right? So, I think the important thing is whether we're effective. And interestingly, not liking something can actually be as effective as and profitable as liking something in the marketing realm. And I think Giles will now explain why that's the case.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't get much worse than this poor sod here. So few ad mascots have been so despised and ridiculed and derided as old Gio Compario, to the point that Go Compare themselves even tweet their original campaign's planned storyline to mock Kill Him Off. And that was 9 years ago. 9 years ago, they went to kill him off, but he was one of the most effective ad campaigns of recent years. So they couldn't actually kill him off. He's still around now. 12 years later, and he's one of the most distinctive brand assets. And what started with an idea to stand out and be distinct has been invested in consistently over time and is now synonymous with insurance. To the point when Droga 5 won the account in 2020, they knew what they were inheriting and they knew the value, despite and partly because people were vandalizing outdoor media with poor Gio's face on it. And they knew they had inherited a piece of brand gold. And that's not just my opinion. That's my mum's opinion. So there. And she's knocking on 80. Doesn't give a monkeys about marketing, but that is salient. Whenever I need insurance, I think of him, I think of Go Compare. So creating and investing in distinctive brand assets is not brave and it's not risky. And we'll come on to that a bit more in a minute. It is perfectly and powerfully logical and smart. This was developed by the Ehrenberg Bass Institute, home of Byron Sharp and Jenny Romanek and other science and evidence-led marketers. It's a very simple way of understanding and managing brand codes, aka distinctive brand assets, and the makeup of which can take many forms. A distinctive brand asset is essentially a non-brand name trigger for a brand name in category buyer memory. And these take verbal, visual, even auditory form. So if you think of MasterCard's deep association with the word priceless, McDonald's is instantly recognizable golden arches, or Intel's famous 5-note mnemonic. Ehrenberg Bass has led the way in shaping thinking and around the importance of distinctive brand assets. And a study by Kantar, for instance, found brands with the strongest assets are on average 52% more salient than their rivals. In other words, they are more likely to spring to mind when consumers are shopping within the category. They are quite literally Gio Compario annoyingly opera singing his way around my mum's head. Ipsos did some more research, a Power of You paper, which analysed over 2,000 pieces of creative film and video to examine the relationship between effectiveness and the presence or not of brand assets. And they found that aside from audio assets, which are almost criminally underused by brands, brand characters, such as Gio, were 6 times more likely than average to be part of the highest performing ads, more than twice as effective as celebrities as assets. So that's your Gary Linekers for Walkers and your George Clooney's of this world, both of them being less effective than, say, the Duracell bunny. 12 plus years of Gio Compario is actually a relatively recent example of an asset being created, an asset being invested in to the point where it represents that real brand value, which is nothing to do with the product's commodity. It's entirely the opposite. And that's a relative baby in the world of distinctive brand assets. So one of the most effective and one of my most favorite briefs of all time was this back in 1915. And what subsequently happened is Coca-Cola successfully created a bottle that is so distinct that you would recognize it by feel in the dark or seeing it smashed, broken on the ground. I recently heard about someone from the IT industry who was asked to sit in on several ad agency presentations, and he thought they were brilliant. The slides, the stagecraft, the quality of the argument was higher than anything he'd seen in his own industry. But he added, you ad guys all make a terrible mistake. You sold positives. In IT, only in the direst cases would you ever sell a solution by detailing the benefits. We sell on fear. If you don't buy this solution, the following bad things will happen. I've never seen an agency argue its case this way, he concluded. By selling only the positives, we frame marketing as an optional extra, and it simply isn't.
Yes, which I think brings us to the question of creativity, and the great ad man, Bill Bernbach, this is one of his most famous quotes. He said that creativity is the last unfair advantage we're legally allowed to take over our competitors. And interestingly, I think that quote has become only more true over time. It's now some 60 years since he said it. But given the increasing influence of regulation and all the rest of it, I think it's absolutely true. But the problem, of course, is that creativity is quite a mercurial concept. And because of the fact that it's not easy to measure, it tends to be a source of kind of bum-clenching anxiety for people who Rory Sutherland would refer to as the arithmocracy, who kind of are our overlords. And so inevitably, because of that, the people who control the purse strings have put an increasing focus on creative outputs that can be measured. And that has really led us to the siren calls of things like precision targeting and digital metrics and, a sort of ad tech dodginess. But while creativity itself is very difficult to assess, numerically, there's a fair amount of evidence to demonstrate its value. And so this is probably the first example that I would show you, which is, so this is from a 2014 study by AdMap. It was based on an analysis of more than 1,500 case studies, and basically they ranked the top 10 factors that drove advertising profitability. And you can see there that creative execution was the second largest contributor to advertising profitability after market size. So it's certainly nothing to be scoffed at. And as the excellent strategist Tom Roach commented at the time, he said, creative execution is certainly not colouring in, and alluding to what Giles mentioned earlier. He said it matters more than nearly everything else. And this finding was kind of echoed by this 2017 Nielsen analysis of advertising effectiveness. And what they found was that the creative quality or creative execution was easily the most important factor contributing to advertising effectiveness and generating sales. It was more than double the next highest factor, which was reach. And interestingly, targeting, which I guess is kind of considered to be the cure of all modern ills in marketing, was one of the least important factors. So clearly, creative execution is important if you're interested in increasing sales and profits, and presumably you are if you hear at this talk. So we need to take it seriously. Can you move on, Giles? Okay, so then I guess the next question is whether creative awards are important. Even in, among agency people, creative awards are a very polarising issue. And certainly among the, in the big industry awards, every year we will see what we might describe as ads for ad people, by which I mean ads that are primarily focused on winning awards rather than being effective in the real world. And probably the most egregious example of that I can remember recently is this one, which you might remember from a few years ago. And you can see that what they did was basically take a stock photo and retrofit it to a campaign, and I think they added on some bollocks copy, which didn't make much sense. So clearly this happens, and hopefully it's at the extreme end. And in fact, the division between what might be considered award-winning work and effective work might actually be a bit of a false dichotomy. According to Les Burnett and Peter Field's work for the IPA, creatively awarded campaigns are actually more effective at driving market share growth than non-awarded campaigns. So I actually found that a little bit surprising. Some people have questioned the role of survivorship bias in that data. So particularly Harry Guild, who's a BBH strategist, remarked that nobody is entering dross into the IPA, which is certainly relevant. But having said that, other research institutes such as Nielsen and the Ehrenberg Bass Institute have reached very similar conclusions to the IPA. So it certainly kind of supports the idea that creativity is important in driving commercial outcomes. And that's obviously what we would hope. The next example that we'll show you, so this is actually from a guy called Everard Hunter. He posted this recently. He's a very well-regarded CMO here in Australia. And this shows the cost per lead, or CPL, of various different radio ad creatives. And these were all assigned the same dollar value media buy. And so they've ranked it from kind of the best to the worst. So the best on the far left through to the worst on the far right. And you can see that the best performing ad creative generated was around 5 times more cost effective than the worst on the right. And this kind of performance distribution is common. This is what you'll generally see. And what's also interesting is that the cost per leads that were generated by these tended to be pretty consistent from the beginning. So the best ad campaigns tended to be effective from the outset, whereas the weaker ones tended not to improve over time. So, history is on our side here, basically. We can demonstrate how to be effective. We can show that how to minimise risk, and generally speaking, we can place pretty safe creative bets. But what we're not doing is that we're not being brave. And I think that's a really important point. Essentially, when we talk about being brave to clients in particular, what we're saying is that you're cheapening what you do to a reckless roll of the dice, and saying that success is kind of is pretty slim, whereas that's absolutely not what we're doing. This is kind of true bravery, and even looking at an image like this makes my stomach turn. The idea of being out at sea at all is terrifying to me, but in a storm is even worse. But, clearly we are not asking our clients to do something like this. Are we really asking them to run into a burning building? Are we asking them to fight off a wild animal, or, even just to kind of throw away everything in their world for the sake of a creative recommendation? It's absurd. Obviously, our species has kind of evolved very specifically to avoid threats and risk. And so why would we set off their evolutionary sirens by talking about bravery? It's nonsensical. And so, that's why this is such a silly thing to be saying to people who we're expecting to make decisions that are in our favour. Probably even more eloquently, I think, we don't get to talk about bravery, and this is particularly well put by Charlotte Leonard, who's Nils Leonard's wife. And Nils, as many of you would probably know, is one of the world's best creatives and the founder of Uncommon. So she said to him, "Nils, fuck off. Firemen get to talk about bravery. You sit in edit suites and make short films about cheese or some shit. You don't get to talk about bravery," which, pithy, but certainly very relevant, I think, to our situation. Can you move on, Giles? So, yes, proper marketing is effective. It's smart. It's a calculated risk. It's being distinct, as we mentioned before, and probably, above all, it's quite boring in its component logic. But the point is that it's creative in its execution. Good agencies and good marketers really need to arm themselves with the evidence, some of which we've shown here today, and the confidence to be able to restore creativity to the forefront of business success. And also to ensure that, even from the outside and without full context, something that might appear to be brave is actually relatively low risk and ultimately effective work. Thanks.
Well done, chaps. That was fabulous. And I think there's been a few comments. We'll get to the content in a moment, but there's been a few comments first to the beauty of the slides that have been put together, but then also the file name up the top, which I think there's an awful lot of folks who can sort of relate to the experience of actually draft final. Seriously, this is it. Update 7.pdf. Love it. Thank you both so much. And there are a bunch of open questions, folks. So if you want to get your questions in now, or use the thumbs up feature to get the questions that you want asked to the top, then I am going to be your conduit for the remaining 15 minutes or so. So, folks, let's start with number one. And Giles, Ryan, I think this was largely your argument throughout, but Karen here has provided a counterpoint, which is there ever a merit in taking a calmer / boring / safer approach to marketing? And Karen gives the example of in B2B. Surely there can't be really space for every business to embrace a bolder brand. So I don't know which one of you wants to take that, but I'll throw it out.
Maybe I should take that one, Giles.
You go ahead, mate. I'll add the bits you miss.
I think that's an interesting question, because I predominantly work in B2B. So I work in healthcare, I mean, it's not strictly B2B, but certainly we do a lot of work with healthcare professionals, for example. So it's not direct to consumer, and that's a constant struggle. Basically, with our clients, is that we have to try and kind of balance being out there and trying to get cut through with the problems of regulation. And I guess what we try to do is to try and work within regulations while then, as much as possible, trying to be creative in ways that work within it. And it is a constant battle. But I think probably in the past few years, it's actually been really interesting in the healthcare space, because there's been kind of this explosion of creativity that probably had been long overdue, and I think people had learnt from, there's been a lot of people who have moved over from the consumer side, for example, who kind of looked at things differently and just go, well, why can't we do this? And as long as it's within the medical, Medicines Australia regulations, for example, over here, then there is no reason, and it really had become a matter of convention. And I think that happens a lot in B2B, that you really do stick to those industry standards, a bit like the Death Metal Festival. That's what people are used to seeing. That's what you kind of get used to doing. When things can actually be done differently. So sometimes it's just a matter of thinking laterally. But yeah, look, it is a challenge.
Love that.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that, Joe, and just to echo Ryan, it was Karen, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, it is a great question, and it's certainly valid. My the work that I do, my agency Gasp, predominantly, I'd say 80% of our clients are B2B. But the same logic and the same evidence and the same rules apply from a psychological perspective. So the need to stand out, the need to achieve recall with your target customers is still as real as it is in B2C or any other space. If anything, it can be easier. I think the trouble that B2B has when we have these kind of big, open, broad discussions is there isn't the audience for B2B, because often, especially with the work we do, we're dealing with very niche categories within the B2B space. And the work that we do might have huge success, but it's relative to that tiny, tiny fraction of an industry. And it doesn't really get eyeballs outside of that space. So we've delivered barbershop quartets to target customers. We've sent rubbish in the post. We've done all sorts of things that achieve that standout and effectiveness. Now, all of that is trivial if you're not able to back it up with the right process once it goes to the sales teams and subsequent communications. And equally, there's no better way to kill a shit product than with great marketing. So it's only a small component, but the actual significance of achieving recall and being distinct is just as valid. If anything, it can be easier, especially if you look at industries, fintech's probably a good example where people have adopted more distinct communication strategies, but there's still a long way to go in lots of spaces. And I think there is still opportunity there. And don't forget, measuring your distinctive assets is relatively easy to do if you can do it on a panel survey type process, and it can be as trivial and as simple as the colors that you use or the words that you use. It doesn't have to be big creative stunts. So I still think there are parallels.
100%. And I love the point that you're both making really here, which is, there's opportunity that exists within this B2B environment that could be seen as conservative. I love that point that you made there, Ryan, about convention rather than actually sort of not being a possibility. It's just something that we've fallen into, and it's something that we keep on repeating. And I guess it sort of brings me back to a quote from the book where you speak about your experience in medicine when you were practicing medicine, and it's on about a part where you speak about a book called The House of God, but you finish off this particular part of the book by just saying, notwithstanding our obsession with technology and chatbots and AI and all the other substitutes we have for humanity, our work is still mostly done by people. And I guess the point of the talk here is that it's still done for people too. So whether you're in a B2B space or a B2C space, it's always comes back down to people, right? And their emotions and their logical nature and everything that goes with that. I feel like that was like one of your like most amazing points in the book that I really, really loved. And I want to bring that in actually, Ryan, and ask, because you also make a point about bringing in other interests into your work and sort of medicine and stuff like that. So how has your background in medicine sort of informed your marketing career in a way?
Well, I think probably in a couple of ways. First, well, maybe I'll say 3 ways. It's been very helpful in terms of it's allowed me to bridge my career from healthcare to marketing much more easily, because I kind of came in with a specialisation and an understanding of healthcare originally. That's the very boring part of it. I think secondarily, it's I had learnt from my medical background to be very skeptical and to always, kind of rely on the evidence. And I think, that's what, as Giles and I have just been discussing, that's, it's a really important factor, and I think lacking among a lot of people in marketing, is that, a lot of people rely on conjecture and sort of completely unvalidated claims and all that kind of stuff. And so that really did teach me to think critically about those kinds of claims. And so that's probably why, if I come across as a contrarian in the book and so on, then that's probably why. And what was my third point? I can't remember. I think just probably, probably just a bit more of an understanding about, as you just talked about, probably of humanity and understanding the human condition. I think particularly because I practiced in psychiatry for many years. I think that probably gave me a bit of an edge in terms of just understanding human behaviour and psychological motivations and that kind of thing. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. So last week we saw a campaign, I guess, to share a personal view, which I thought was awful. And I think that certainly from Twitter, a lot of the chatter around it was that it was awful too, which was the Burger King tweets that went out. So Gail asks, hi, I'm Gail, a strategic marketing student at Imperial College. I was wondering what are your thoughts on the Burger King's Women Belong in the Kitchen campaign on Twitter. Was it bravely stupid or just a lack of execution? And I don't know, it was obviously really, really bad in my perspective, but I'd be interested on your views on it, because I guess this does it was certainly memorable, but it wasn't necessarily for the right reason. So I guess we kind of move into, was it effective as well, and et cetera, et cetera.
I think you have to answer that first of all by saying it was horrific for many, many reasons. So I guess if I can tweak Gail's question, and again, it's an excellent question, to is there anything we can take from it or learn from it, rather than just rightfully condemning the ad, because it was terrible for more reasons than I can probably articulate. I think it certainly highlights the significance of the context that ads are placed. I think other people have noted that the print ad was probably carried less offence because it gave the opportunity for people to actually see the full message that Burger King was attempting to communicate, being the introduction of some scholarship type initiatives. So it does highlight that you can't just place the same piece of creative across all different channels and expect the same result. I think equally, it's a great example that shows people don't care about your advertising. And I think even in the twisted, perverted realms of marketing circles, of which I am one, where you obsess over work as if it's suspended in galleries, not the reality, which is it's an ad that might just pass your glance at a second part of your day. people don't care about our ads. They really don't care. So we can never assume that people will read the whole ad. So I think Burger King, one of their defense from the social media team was, oh yes, but if you read the rest of the ad, you'll see that isn't what we're saying, as if people are even going to bother reading that. They're just going to take the offense. So there's so many ways it was flawed. And I think that Fur has come out and, I mean, Fur, I happen to know, is on paternity leave at the moment. So I think it's too easy to I don't know, aim the crossfire at certain people like him, who I suppose has a history of taking big creative risks. And I applaud him for that. But this was just an example where he got it terribly and morally wrong, I think.
Spot on. Cool. Okay, we'll carry on unless you've got anything to add there, Ryan.
No, I largely agree with that. I think probably the fact that they had been lauded by the industry for a lot of their previous work probably led them to complacency a little bit. Thought they were, they thought they could do whatever they wanted, and it backfired.
Fair enough. Cool. Let's go to Luke. So Luke asked the question, why do you think, like design, everyone thinks they can be a marketer and they can input on your strategies or even your execution? So I guess this works on a wider scale here, which is folks' understanding of marketing within organizations and how we're sort of thought of within businesses. And I'll throw that out to either of you. Potentially, Ryan, do you want to go first? If you
Can you tell me the question again?
Sure. So Luke asked, why do you think, like design, everyone thinks they can be a marketer and they can input on your strategies?
Yeah. Well, certainly as a copywriter, I can tell you why. Because anyone can use a keyboard, and they think that therefore they can write. It's a constant daily battle for us. And I guess one of the other contributors to it is that there is really no barrier for entry to marketers. And this is one of my bugbears about marketing in general. And something that Mark Whitson, for example, has written a lot about in the last few years, is that I don't know, something like 50% or more of marketers have had no formal training in marketing. And so when that's the case, there's a lot of stuff on social media that you'll see, people kind of almost wearing a lack of training as a badge of honor. And a lot of people assuming that marketing is just, I don't know, writing social media posts and that kind of thing. I mean, you see a lot of this basic kind of anti-intellectualism, I suppose, in some ways. And I think that leads a lot of people to believe that it's not a field that you need to be educated in. And that's sort of, it's what we're up against all the time.
Does that, so a couple of weeks ago, we had someone come in and speak, one of our speakers, and they said, let me reframe the question. So from a lot of my experience, I spent a lot of time thinking people should understand me and people should understand marketing, and it's my job to educate the rest of the company what marketing is, etc., etc. The speaker came in and they had a great point. They work in a larger organization, and they said it's actually my responsibility as a marketer to speak the language of business, which in their organization was finance. And are we just, do we spend too long just sort of thinking we need to be understood, when actually the thing that matters is that we need to be spending more time speaking the language of other people, to the point of your talk, which was, it depends on the audience that it lands with, rather than the other way around. Giles, I don't know whether you got any thoughts there.
I think it's important to speak the language of finance, because it allows you to rightfully frame marketing as a grown-up part of a business. And ultimately, if you have accountants and economists controlling the purse strings, which, that's quite a clumsy claim and statement to make, but it's probably broadly true if you excuse my lack of finance knowledge. We need to be able to evidence and provide evidence for what we do and why we do it, which is what I hope there was a couple of slides from our presentation in to enable people to do. But I mean, makes a great point about the barriers to entry being non-existent, and that is obviously an issue. I don't know how easily that can be avoided. I remember talking to Murray Calder, who's an incredibly brilliant man and strategist who's spent most of his recent years working with Mediacom up in Scotland, and he was talking to me about whiskey and explaining why, subjectivity aside, there's no such thing as a bad Scotch whiskey, because it takes 20 plus years to produce your first batch. So in those specific scenarios, you don't have people trying to flog snake oil, because you simply can't. You have to put so much and invest so much into it. And I think we do need to understand the financial significance of marketing, and we do need to have the conversations that are relevant. I remember Mark Ritson talking to me once about the conversations that go on under the boardroom table, and what he means by that, it's the managing the dynamic of people in a particular business, and it's managing how to have the same conversation with different people. But as trained marketers, we should be able to talk to different segments of a market depending on their characteristics and attitudes and behavior. And the same is true internally within a business. We need to talk to the CFO using language that he understands. And we can do it because the evidence is out there that shows the financial gains of good, proper marketing. And I think it's probably not an exclusive problem to marketing. I think that's just a problem that exists in life. You need to talk the right language to the right people. And at a macro level, that's certainly valid for us.
Absolutely, I love that, and I guess to bring it to life, then the example is the stickers on your lights, right? You know, that's exactly the thing. It's like speaking to those folks in a way that, you know, is going to resonate. I love it. So I want to get one more question in, because I think, you know, it's a nice light-hearted one, hopefully, to finish on, which is the biggest creative risk that each of you have taken that's paid off over the course.
Working with Giles.
Oh, that's so lovely.
He's nicked my answer.
That's really lovely. Well, there you go.
Yeah. Go on, Ryan. Is that it? Oh, you're that much of an arse.
No, I actually can't think off the top of my head. Every time I deal with a healthcare client, it's a creative risk, to be honest. Yeah, I'll let you go, John.
We've probably had a few, really, because we're quite, I don't know. I think people have described us as difficult to work with, which is probably quite fair from an agency perspective. But it's only because our success, this is going to sound really wanky, but our success as a tiny, tiny independent agency is solely dependent on our clients' success. And yes, that's probably true with networks, but I think that's less so. They've got big accounts to hide behind. And one of my favorite campaigns, which is going back a few years, is when we we left golf balls in people's gardens all along the M3 motorway to describe how close our client golf club was to their proximity, albeit they would typically manage and run their new members acquisition campaigns in close proximity, 5 mile radius plus of the clubhouse. We realized they were literally bang on one of the M3 junctions. So we just left golf balls in people's gardens to kind of indicate it had been hit from the golf club, because that's how close it was. And the reason that was a creative punt is because the client was adamant they didn't want to do it. And I stewed on it like all arsehole creatives who want their ideas to go ahead. And it ultimately said to them, look, we'll pay for the whole thing. We just want to do it. And if it doesn't work, we'll swallow the fees. And it worked. I mean, that's not to say all our ideas work, because some of them don't, obviously. But that was a risk, because that was in I think only our 3rd year of running the agency.
I love that. And what was the result at the end? Presumably,
the result was huge. And the thing is, this is what's so important when it comes to measuring marketing. And one of the, I suppose, issues that I have with ROI is it forces people to measure campaign success over such a short, defined timeline. This is still working. People are still finding out about the campaign because it got a lot of earned media. And it still brings people to the club because people remember it, and that's key. I hear we don't work with them anymore, funny enough, unrelated. And the chairman got in touch with me only last year, I think, to say that they still get people bringing that up when they go in to join, because they remember it. And that's the key thing, is if we can get in people's minds, if we can be Gio Compario in my mum's head, that stuff really works. But it's hard to put that on a spreadsheet in Excel.
Absolutely.
And therein lies one of the issues that we have.
100%. Well, I love that. That's a really amazing campaign and a lovely, lovely way to finish the hour. So thank you both so much for spending the time and illuminating on us all on that. And also thank you to everyone that's been chatting away in the chat. It's been amazing to sort of see you all interacting with each other on a range of issues, from everything from qualifications all the way through to the content to just supporting each other for folks looking for jobs. Just really, really brilliant. I mean, what an absolute joy it is to bring these with you and to share these experiences. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to leave it there, other than to say that the next webinar is next Tuesday. Please do sign up, and also please do take the time to thank the sponsors. Take the time to thank Ryan and Giles as well, and just say hi, because they've put a lot of effort into this, and it's quite clear. There you go. There's their Twitter handles. So take the time to say thank you on Twitter. We spend a lot of time speaking about LinkedIn, but Twitter is a real opportunity for us to continue our conversation. So that's all done. Thank you all so much. I hope you have a lovely day. Thank you all for being here, and take care of yourself.